Well-known story, but a good time. It's always good to repeat stories if we become familiar with them. It doesn't mean that they don't still carry the same truths. But a story about these identical twins. One was a hope-filled optimist. Everything is coming up roses, you would say, those optimistic people. And the other twin was the sad, hopeless pessimist, right? And he believed that if there's something could go wrong, it would go wrong. And for him, it was being an optimist. Well, anyway, the parents of the boy brought them to a psychologist and to get some help. And the psychologist suggested in the parents to plan to balance their personalities. He said that on the next birthday, put them in separate rooms, right, to open their gifts. And give the pessimist the best toys you could ever afford, and give the optimist a box of manure, right? So the parents followed these instructions carefully, and they watched what would happen. So they peeked into the pessimist's room, and they heard him complaining. This pessimist. I don't like the color of this computer. I bet the calculator is going to break anyway. And I don't like video games. They're boring. And I know someone who got a better bike than this one. And the parents were really kind of discouraged, and so they tiptoed in the other room to peek in. And they saw the little optimist throwing manure up in the air. And he was giggling, saying, okay, you fooled me. With all this manure, there has to be a pony somewhere around here, right? It's kind of a famous story between the optimist and the pessimist. And we learned early on that our perception is reality for most people. How we perceive things is how we even judge what we consider to be right. Two people can look at the same situation. Each person filters it through his or her own mind, right, and situation in life, and comes up with a judgment, a perception, an opinion about what's happening here. Whether something is actually true or not is not as important as what people think is true at the time, because it creates the reality for that person. And so, since we can all come up with different kinds of judgments and ideas about what about the world and what is happening, there are some people who are by nature pessimists. And the first thing they think of is the worst, right? They always impute the bad motives. And there are those who are by nature optimists, right? And they see things the right way, or they see things in a very positive light. And that's why the first impressions are important. And I'm sure we all know how important first impressions are, because once someone has an idea about another person, it's often hard to change that idea. There are some who always think the worst of other people and their motives, and there are those who are always looking for the good first, and they focus on that. As I was thinking of that, and I was reflecting on today's reading, when you look at it, there are people interested in the birth of this child, Jesus. The Magi want to go and find the Savior to bring him gifts and to adore him. The other, that is King Herod, is also interested in this child, but he sees that same child as a threat to his power. And through all of history, people have been making judgments about this child, born 2,000 years ago. And it still seems to happen today. But again, King Herod was threatened by anyone and everyone. And eventually he would kill anyone he did not like. And that's the world he lived in. And that's how he saw everything. It made me think of so much of how our attitudes about the faith and the way we see the world and the judgments that we make about things say more about us and our perceptions than about what might be in fact true or not. In discussions about religion now, people say that religion is bad because look at all the fighting and the wars. Look at the wars that it caused. For many years, that's what I thought was the only idea. And then I thought, what wars or fighting did Mother Teresa cause? Or for St. Francis? What wars did he begin? Or all the Catholic Relief Services people who are working in the refugee camps. Why is it that one wouldn't reference these as well as people who actually are living the faith? Even more so, most of us in this building lived through the bloodiest century of the history of our world, right? The 20th century. And I think that non-religious governments that had Stalin or Hitler or other professed godless countries began the biggest and bloodiest of wars. Some even say, with all the evil in the world, they don't believe in God. But when asked, what about all the good in the world? I'm often dismissed as if that's irrelevant. It's only the bad you focus on. And we think that we are speaking to a pessimist when the answer is, I don't see any good in the world. Some see this little child born in a manger as the Prince of Peace, and others see him as a source of division. Some see him as a wonderful teacher in the ways of his Father, calling for selflessness and charity and sacrifice of others. And others think that what he had to say was ridiculous. Some come here to see Mass, come here and see the Mass, the reading of Scriptures and the celebration of the Lord's Supper as the highlight of their week, praising God for all that they have come to see. And others see it as nothing but an empty ritual. Some here know the experience of Jesus living in their souls right now, alive in their life, guiding them, helping them, giving them the graces they need. And others in this very same place have never experienced that. They don't know these things at all. And the perceptions that we have because of the experiences and the way we live often direct us in very powerful ways. The truth, we believe, really is that the world is a mixture of both light and darkness. And I do believe that when we see God one day and all has been revealed, as he says in the Scriptures, we will see that when it seemed the darkest to us, maybe, God's grace was always nearby, a place of light, maybe in the people and the things that were said to us, in the situations that happened. If we had just looked around, maybe even just turned around, we could have acknowledged, we see how much we miss what was right in front of us. My rector in the seminary taught me a most valuable lesson. I think of it now, still remember it as 30 years ago over that, actually. There's been some major disagreements among seminarians, and if you've ever been in seminary, I used to call it like the hotbed of Catholicism. Because every fight that happens in a parish happens even 10 times hotter in the seminary, right? So you have to remember that I was formed when there was much more heated discussions about the church and the left and the right, the liberals and conservatives, the traditionalists, the progressives. I sometimes wonder how I survived in all of that, And so he was kind of tired of us arguing over the church issues and things. So he got us all in the chapel. And I remember him, and if I close my eyes, I still see him standing at the pulpit saying, I remember him saying that for as a priest's advice he gave us, and I think I've tried, and every time I correct myself if I'm not in that direction, is always impute good motives first. Assume the good, until you have proof of otherwise. Assume the good first in everyone else you meet, right? Until you really have evidence of something other than that. I know it's great advice in any approach to marriage, the way we relate to each other, to our parents. Tell children, assume the good of your parents, not the bad, first and foremost. Or children, to assume the good in your children first, or in your friends. First, assume the best intentions, the good. You know, King Herod automatically assumed that Jesus would be a threat to his power and his position. And history documents him as paranoid, jealous, greedy, unstable kind of leader, right? And that's caused him to see the greatest event that could have ever that happened, we believe, in all of history, as something bad for him. And as Catholics, we have to deal with the world and all that is in it. And it is God's great gift to us. And our first position is to be hopefully positive, optimistic, finding and seeing the good first. It's not that we're being naive, because we know there is evil in the world. We believe that. We know that. We teach it. But we also know that God, the source of all good, is nearby. And that's our goal, to find it. So in your dealings with the world, with your spouse, your children, your parents, the next door neighbor, or anyone else who might annoy you next to you, assume the best, the good, and the holy first. I have no doubt that you will see God right nearby.